No sacred deer gets killed in this movie. No deer appears in this movie, period. Worst movie ever. That's the end of the review. Okay, I'm just joking, but seriously, I don't know how they expect us to get the reference in the title. So the reference in the title is apparently a reference to a play by some unpronounceable Greek word by Euripides, which tells the story of where, when they were going off to the Trojan War, Agamemnon offered to sacrifice his daughter in exchange for favorable winds when they're going off to the war with Troy. So that happens, and he changes his mind at the last minute, but he's forced to sacrifice his daughter. And in one version of it, they sacrifice a sacred deer instead. But that's, I don't think, the canon version. That's like in some in one version it's like a postscript. So you're supposed to get that this is a reference to a Greek play, even though it's not really similar at all to the Greek play, and that it's not just a reference to the Greek play, but it's a reference to a non-canonical version of the Greek play. So that's pretty annoying. Like I said, there's no sacred deer in this movie, so the title doesn't really make any sense. But let's not focus on the title. So there's good movies, there's bad movies, and then there's just weird movies. And when I was watching this movie, I couldn't tell what even after seeing it, like, I don't know what to think about it, because it's just really, really weird. And I mean, there's a lot of good aspects about it, there's a lot of bad aspects about it, and it's also just really strange. So how do you review something like that? Well, I guess let's just go through the story of this film and we'll talk about it. So this is probably the most Kubrick-esque movie that Stanley Kubrick didn't direct. It's very similar to Eyes Wide Shut, The Shining. It really seems to be channeling him in terms of the cinematography, the plot structure, the music especially is very Kubrick-esque. The performances are interesting. People in this movie have really surreal, stilted dialogue. Nobody has a normal emotional range. Everybody just acts in really strange ways. And I normally like surrealism, but like I said, here it's just kind of... My issue with this movie isn't so much the plot or the acting. It's more kind of the moral point I think the film's trying to make. But I don't know what to say. I mean, it's very well made, I think is a good way to put it. It's a very well made film. It's very flawed. I think that's on purpose, just with the directorial decisions that were made. Like, maybe by virtue of just what they were going for in this, it was always going to be kind of a mixed bag. But that's enough of me rambling on. Let's get into the movie. So the film starts out with an extremely disgusting scene of a really just explicit open heart surgery that goes on for like 5 minutes. I don't see why that's necessary. This movie has a lot of like random nudity and like just gross stuff in it, which just kind of seems out of place. Like, there's no real reason for it to be whatever was rated R or whatever. They probably easily could have cut out like 2 minutes of footage or less and the film wouldn't be R-rated. And I kind of hate it when they randomly insert that. Not that I have any issue with nudity or violence or whatever. It's just if it's put in there like just to shock people, that irritates me. So Stephen Murphy, the main character, and another weird point, the entire family has Irish accents, despite I think it taking place in Massachusetts, in Boston or something. I don't know where it takes place, and I guess that's kind of part of the surrealism, but it's just very odd. So Stephen Murphy just finishes. It starts off. He's finished surgery. He goes out to dinner, and he meets a teenage boy named Martin. So Martin's a very weird boy. He's obviously extremely mentally disturbed, probably retarded. I'm not sure if he has autism or a low IQ or whatever, but his father died a couple of years previously to the movie, and Stephen was the man who was operating on him. He was the doctor who was operating on him, and he died under his care. So Stephen feels bad and kind of guilty about the whole thing, so he buys Martin a really expensive watch. He gives him money. He tries to act to a mentor to the boy. And as time goes on, Martin just keeps calling him like more and more, showing up at work more and more. And Stephen, like I said, feels bad for the boy, so he invites him over to his house. So then we find out that Stephen is a super Chad because he married Nicole Kidman, who, as we've discussed previously, is an Aryan goddess. Also, she's like 5'11", so she's 2 inches taller than Colin Farrell, which makes him even more Chad. So he's super rich. He has a huge house. He has 2 beautiful children. Nicole Kidman's his wife. So everything's going good. So he invites his Martin over, and Martin's just really weird the whole time. He immediately, using his autistic charm, seduces Stephen's daughter, who I really hated in this movie, Kim. My issue is she immediately falls in love with Martin, who's a weirdo, and she starts like going out with him. She starts going out on she starts going out with him. She starts going out on motorcycle trips without wearing a helmet. The whole thing is really, really weird. So immediately, as that thing finishes, Martin basically insists that Stephen come over to his house for dinner the next night. Once again, very weird. He demands it. He hangs up before he can refuse. He goes over, and they have dinner, and he demands that Stephen stay and watch a movie with his mother and him, and his mother tries to seduce him by sucking on his fingers because he has beautiful surgeon hands, and Stephen leaves, and then Martin just keeps demanding him to harass him more and more. So one morning his son, Robert or Bob, awakens to discover that his legs are broken. He can't move, he can't stand up, he can't do anything. So Stephen takes him to the hospital. They spend all day running tests on him, and they can discover nothing wrong. There's not a neurological problem. There's not a blood clot problem. There's no obvious thing that would be causing him to not be able to walk. So the next morning, Martin shows up at the hospital, and he says his father didn't die in the car crash. Stephen performed the surgery, and Stephen was apparently drunk when he performed the surgery, and that resulted in his father's death. So Martin says to balance the act of killing his father, Stephen must choose and kill one member of his family. So yeah, he has to kill one member, or else Martin will somehow use his power to cause 4 stages of death to each member of Stephen's family other than himself: paralysis, losing the will to live, bleeding from the eyes, and death. So Stephen doesn't believe it at first, but then he finds out that Robert is unable to eat. So they have to put him onto a feeding tube. He can't stand up. Kim, his daughter, also loses her will to live and loses use of her legs as well. So Anna goes over to talk to Martin, and Martin says it's the only thing I know that's close to justice. And this is kind of where he's starting to get into my issue with this movie. We don't know, it's never explained how Martin can do this, and I guess people will say, well, Argent, that's not really the point, it's part of the surrealism. But I don't know, it's kind of lame. It's just Martin has these inexplicable powers, and it's like a deus ex machina. They only work in this very specific circumstance. He can't use them to, you'll see later in this movie, he suddenly can't use them. Nothing about this film really makes any sense. And I think it's to its detriment, because it irritates me when they implement supernatural elements, but they provide half an explanation, but they don't go all the way. So Kim, his daughter, gets a call from Martin, and while she's on the phone with him, she's able to stand up and walk. So she's still in love with Martin, and I call her the Eternal Thought because she remains in love with Martin even after finding out that he's the one behind it, and even though it eventually leads to a member of her family's death, she still is in love with him. I guess because she likes the fact that he's a serial killer. Like, that turns her on, I guess. Like I said, the eternal thought. I kind of felt throughout the movie that Steven should have just killed her because she obviously is a psycho. My interpretation of the film is, my kind of troll interpretation is, Martin had no actual powers. Steven's kids are just shitty people, and they're just doing this whole thing to troll him. They just decided to go along with Martin. Definitely, I think Kim was just going along with Martin as a way to troll her father, maybe because he wasn't spending enough time with them or some nonsense like that. So that's kind of my interpretation. So Anna begs him to not kill the children, yada yada. So Anna talks to Steven because she now believes that Martin has power, and she's like, the only logical outcome of this film, the only logical solution is we have to kill one of the kids because we can still have children, another child. Although Nicole Kidman, I think, is 51 or something, so I think she's too old to have children at this point in time. But that's what she proposes, and she tries to seduce Steven, but he's so Chad that even Nicole Kidman can't seduce him when she's trying her best. So that all happens. They finally determine that nothing was wrong with the kids, and they send them home, but they have to have feeding tubes in them 24/7 because they refuse to eat. Once again, I don't buy Martin's powers. I think his kids are just shitty people. But the movie really seems to take the perspective that Martin is completely justified, that somehow Steven is responsible for Martin trying to kill his family. Which I don't get how that's, like, justifiable under any moral system. Is Steven directly responsible for his father's death? I mean, on one hand, yes, because he had a couple drinks. I don't think he was completely drunk. I think they said he had a couple drinks was kind of like what the official explanation was. But the question is, would the guy have died anyways? Were his injuries mortal? Did that really affect it? Would he have screwed up anyways? And at the same time, you're eventually going to screw up some surgeries if you're a doctor. I mean, it's just, some days you're going to be tired. Some days something's going to happen. You're human and fallible. He might have become an alcoholic because of how stressful his job is. I mean, who knows? Maybe there wasn't another surgeon that day that could have performed the operation. So even if we accept that Steven is responsible for his father's death, it wasn't a deliberate murder like what Martin's doing. It was, at worst, negligence. And at best, a tragic accident. So Anna goes and, like, confirms this because she goes to Steven's best friend, who's the anesthesiologist, and he confirms that Steven was drunk, but like everybody else in this movie, he's a piece of crap, and he demands a hand job. So we get kind of a gratuitous scene of Nicole Kidman giving him a hand job in a car. Which I don't know why I don't know why everyone in this movie has to be an asshole. Like, the doctors at the hospital are an asshole. Nicole Kidman immediately throws her children under the bus. His daughter's a thought who's in love with a serial killer. His son is a little brat. Like, nobody in this movie is likable, actually, except for Steven. Martin's a sociopath. It's kind of interesting. Once again, the movie seems very much like it's siding with Martin and saying this whole thing is somehow Steven's fault. I mean, you're not responsible for other people's actions. I think that's one of the cornerstones of Christian morality, at least, that you have to think about. Regardless of what Steven did or didn't do, he's not responsible for Martin's actions. Martin is an independent, autonomous being, and it's not... The fact that he's threatening him doesn't really matter. So Steven kidnaps Martin, beats the crap out of him, and demands that he reverse the condition of his children. Martin is somehow immune to pain, and having the crap beaten out of him doesn't affect it, and it doesn't happen. So Kim and Bob argue over who their father will choose. Um, Kim attempts to save herself by crawling away, even though in the previous scene she had offered to let him. She had volunteered to be the one who dies. Anna releases Martin for some reason. I kind of feel that they should have just left him in there to die, and regardless of the outcome, they don't wind up killing Martin at the end of the movie, which I don't really understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. So by this point in time, Bob starts bleeding from the eyes, which is the final stage before death. So Steven decides to come up with a fair solution. So he binds all three of his family members and puts them in a circle in his living room. And he takes a rifle and he puts a blindfold on and he just spins around in circles and fires randomly. And he does this a couple times before he kills Bob. So he killed his youngest son. I mean, there's reasons for killing all three of them. I would have killed Kim personally, because even though Nicole Kidman's character is a bitch who immediately throws her children under the bus, she's at least not in love with a sociopathic serial killer. So Bob dies. Somehow he gets away with killing his son. Sometime later, they visit the diner where Steven first met Martin. Martin enters and stares at them. They briefly lock eyes. And as they leave, Kim smiles at him, implying that she's still in love with Martin, even though he led to the death of her brother and ruined their family and tried to kill her. Because she's a thought. I don't know, what else you can say about it. So that's the killing of a sacred deer. Once again, no sacred deer was harmed in the making of this movie. And it does irritate me a lot when they put when a title has nothing to do with the movie, really metaphorically or in terms of what actually happens in the film. So that kind of irritates me. So it's weird because throughout the movie they just have this really intense orchestral, ominous music that is just completely inappropriate in a lot of the scenes. People just act in really weird ways. Everybody in the movie is a complete irredeemable asshole. It's just a really strange film, and I don't really know how to feel about it. Like I said, I mean, is it a good movie? Is it a bad movie? Is it just really weird? I don't know. It's like I said, it's very surrealist. It's also very. I'm trying to think who the other movie it's very much like. It's like a Woody Allen movie and just it being kind of absurdist. So, I don't know. I can't really give this movie a rating or anything. It's very interesting. If you like that kind of thing, I'd probably say watch it. But just be prepared for it to have really messed up moral message. And to not really make a lot of sense. So, not a bad movie. Not exactly a good movie. But very interesting from a cinematography and narrative standpoint. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the review, and I'll talk to you guys later.